What's happening, guys? William Craddock with Will to Win Gaming, brought to you in part by Kayfabe Cards. Shout out to Jonathan Job. Today we're going to be diving into OP07 Dofi, the deck I am definitely most excited about. We're going to try out this new format. We're going to introduce some new elements to our videos, and by the end of it, hopefully you've learned something. Let's dive right in. Alright, start us off. We're going to go over the deck list a little bit. We're going to talk about some of the cards and go a little bit into the tech choices and why we're playing what we're playing, but we'll go over that in more detail a little later. So first we got Edward Weevil, probably the best thing you can hit off a blind flip or a setup with Perona. 4 for 6, draws a card. We got the Don Quixote, Doflamingo blocker. It's been a staple in the deck since OP02. Sets up the top 5 cards of your draw. We have the Perona. Again, just a 1 for 2, sets up the top 5. This is your best card in your opening hand if you're going first, and that's definitely what I like to do with this deck. More on that to come. We have Gecko Moria, not a strict downgrade from the Edward Weevil. A 4 for 6, doesn't draw. However, he does have a baseline 1k counter, so later in the game, you draw him off your life off the top. You do have that option. We have Miss Pudding, which I started with 4. I've whittled it down to 3. I think this is a card you only want one of course, because in a game you're probably only going to be able to use it once. And a lot of times it can clog up the top of your deck. And so most of the time people are playing around it won't do anything. So I think 3 is a good number just in case someone's trying to play big-handed against you. We have the 4 for 5 Crocodile. Mostly a 2k counter, but off a blind flip and a pinch, he's an okay beater, 4 for 5. Nothing to write home about. His ability doesn't come up too often, but hey, 2k counter, Warlord, what's there to complain about? We have the bread and butter of the deck, the brand new Jinbei, 4 for 5, 7 Warlord. Alright, got a theme here. When he comes into play, you can play a 7 Warlords of the Sea, cost 4 or less from your hand, for free. So, ideally, Jinbei into Edward Weevil is, a 5k into a 6k draw card. For 3 Dawn if you went first and had a Perona set up. Or you're godlike and hit the blind flip. Next, we have the Trafalgar Law. He's a 4 for 4, another 2k counter and 7 Warlords. In general, I find if I do blind flip him, I will be returning him to my hand via his ability. I do not like leaving him out as a easy card to take out because you don't want to protect him. However, his upside is if you hit that 7k attack, which normally you do, put him into play, return him to your hand, even though you don't get the body on board, you still get to make them discard. We have the new 6-cost Boa Hancock. This card, again, started as a 4 of. I've kind of cut down on it. Again, it would just clog the top of your deck. You can't always find spots to use it. With that being said, the ability on the card is amazing. Being able to, effectively freeze one of your opponent's attackers can just generate a lot of tempo. We have the oldie but the goodie, the 4-cost Gecko Moria 5k. Returns a 7 Warlords or a Thrillbark Pirate. A 7 Warlords 4 or less or a Thrillbark Pirates to your hand as long as it's not himself. Been around since OP02. I have looked at some of the Dofi deck lists and they are cutting down to like 2 of these. But I think it's just kind of a mistake in my opinion, because being able to just counter out early, use a 2k on even a 5k hit and just get it back is just a very powerful option in the Dofi deck, especially since you're a 5 life leader. We have another 4 for 5k, 2k counter, the OG, the Mihawk. It can be used to filter your hand, but you have to be careful with it because it also messes up your stack. So you have to be cognizant of that. We have the one of Gum Gum Rain event. It's just good if you have too many non-counters in your hand. A lot of other events in the deck, which we're about to go over. And now here's where it kind of gets a little more interesting. We have 2 of the Gum Gum Red Rock. Y'all know what this does. OP04, 6, buries anything insane. And 3 of the Gravity Blade Raging Tiger. This card just came out fairly recently. 7 cost. Put two 6 cost or less characters on the bottom of its owner's deck, and it has a really good trigger of put a 5 cost or less on the bottom of its owner's deck. This card is very strong. As far as the event goes, I had 4 blades, no red rocks in the original build. I found there were certain things like Gecko Moria that become problematic. So I switched it up to this 3-2 configuration. I think this is optimal or close to optimal, but you can play what you wish and kind of figure out what's best for you. Alright, let's move on to the tips and tricks. Hey guys, William Craddock. We're back with our tips and tricks section. And in this, we're going to talk about common patterns you might see playing this deck and really why we play Mihawk over Sanji and a few others. I call them small, but things that'll really help you stand out if you decide to play the Dofy deck. First, let's go over the Mihawk versus Sanji debate. I've seen a lot of people playing Sanji. I know it's a great card. There's a lot of great setups. Sanji and Boa Hancock, extremely powerful. The reason I don't like it, especially going forward, is the common patterns you'll see in the Dofy deck tend to not give you time to set up a Sanji. Now, I know a lot of people are trying to take the draw with the Dofy now, but it's also something I disagree with, and we'll talk about that specifically in the matchup section. So let's take a common pattern if we're going first with Dofy. We don't have a nut draw, but we have the 3-cost Doflamingo. So we play our blocker and we look at our top 5. We have Red Rock. We have 4-cost Vanilla Moria. We have a 2K counter Draco Mihawk. We have the 4-cost 5K Gecko Moria that returns a card. And then we have our 9-drop. Let's say it's Sanji. Now we're going to do our stack. Let's say we'll draw the 2K Mihawk because we plan to get it back with our 4-cost Gecko Moria. Then we'll put our vanilla Gecko Moria next so we can put a 6K into play. Then we're going to draw a Red Rock. Then we'll have our 4/5 Gecko Moria to get back our 2K, which we use to counter. And finally, we have our Sanji. So this is our stack, and this is how it's going to play out. Draw our 2K, attack, put in our vanilla. Draw our Red Rock, attack, put in our Gecko Moria, get back our 2K. So now we're on 7 Dawn. We've gone through 4 cards in our stack. Next, we're going to draw our Sanji. Now, while we have the perfect opportunity to play a Sanji, now it's a blind flip. And realistically, do I want to blind flip and hope to hit what's more than likely going to be a 4/5, which is fine? Or would I rather remove one of their threats, which is more likely something like a Sabo, maybe a 5/7 Rush Ace, depending on what you're playing against. This is a small example. I know there's other ways to set up Sanji, but they generally just don't fit into the tempo curve of Dofy, and this is the main reason I'm choosing to tech Mihawk. Alright, next we're going to go over some of the pros and cons of the Dofy list. This deck is powerful when it does its thing. Pros: incredible curve when going first, especially draw Perona. It's one of the strongest decks in the game. When it gets its engine rolling and almost nothing can stop it. It's a 5-life leader. Which is, I think, is really underestimated at this point in the game. Those of us that have been playing since OP01 kind of know the importance of a 5-life leader versus a 4-life leader. He has lots of options for removal. Blue typically in OP02 did not have this, but now you can generate bodies and remove their bodies efficiently with things like Gravity Rage. Gravity Blade, Raging Tiger, attack for 7, use your leader ability. And overall, it just has a lot of play to it. You can make a lot of decisions that are going to win you the game or lose you the game, and that's going to be on you. It's going to have nothing to do with luck. What are the cons? Well, one of the cons is it has a lot of gameplay to it. You can make a lot of decisions that can either win you the game or lose you the game, and ultimately, it's going to be on you. And why is this a con? Well, because it means the deck has some degree of difficulty, and if you mess it up, we don't like to blame things here at Will to Win Gaming, but it happens, and you mess it up, you're going to have to take it on the chin and move on with your life. Another con of the deck is that if it falls behind, it can struggle with catching up, especially if they play some kind of threat like a Gecko. You don't have a ton of multi-board removal, and Gecko itself is hard to get rid of, so if you're not in a stable spot, something like Gecko that generates a lot of bodies and probably removes some of your bodies at the same time can be really difficult to deal with. So another important thing to remember with the Dofy deck is your stack. This is something that's just inevitable. You're going to have to learn. And realistically, for me, I don't have a great memory. I have a hard time even remembering a 5-card stack sometimes. So I was actually asking the Didi, our own Deanna Dang, what's something that will help me remember what's on top of my deck? And since she went through medical school, she's like, well, just come up with either a mnemonic or some kind of shortcut in your head instead of, thinking, well, I have Edward Weevil, Dracul Mihawk, Gecko Moria, Jinbei on top of my deck. Now I would do something like this. This is my stack. As card 1 is draw, card 2 is hit. Let's say it's Edward Weevil. Card 3 is draw. Card 4 is draw. And then card 5 is hit. So it's going to be looking like draw, hit, draw, hit. And that way, I'm not having to specifically remember what I have at these early stages in the game. I just know what's going to happen, right? Like, I know I'm going to draw this card for my turn. I know I'm going to hit off my Edward Weevil, and then I'm going to hit my Edward Weevil, and then I know I'm going to draw 2 cards, one for the Weevil's effect, one for my turn, and then I'm going to hit another 7 Warlords. This is probably not optimal for a high-level tournament play, but this is something that's going to get you into the deck early if you're having trouble remembering your stack. And I know I'm one of those people, and this is something I personally use, so don't knock it till you try it. Alright, what's going on, guys? We're going to cover some of the matchups I think are going to be more prevalent in OP07. This is our matchup chart. As you can see, this is where I think each of the deck falls in relation to the matchup with the Dofy deck. I put some slight notes just in case, there may be a little thing iffy about it, something that may change course of the matchup, such as like a dice roll. There are a lot of matchups where the dice roll is important in this game. So yeah, let's get into the specifics and how to beat each of these decks. Alright, getting to our matchups. First, we're going to talk about the good matchups. I believe these are Yamato, Taxi Luffy, Enel, Red Purple Law, very important, and Reiju. Yamato, I think they just have trouble chewing through your 5 life. When you go first, the big things you're going to be looking for are your Perona. You're going to be looking for your 3-drop Dofy blocker, and really importantly, just some number of 2Ks. Generally speaking, just having more than average 2Ks puts a lot of strain onto Yamato. But the most important thing will be just, if you go first, just setting up your game plan of things like, turn 1 Perona into a 7 Warlords, into another 7 Warlords, into either a Gravity Blade, into a Mihawk. The reason this matchup is so strong, besides you being a 5-life leader, is, unlike Gecko, who is also fairly strong against Yamato, you have good removal for all their threats. Like, you can kill the Kika Nojos by putting one bottom. You can easily kill Hody with something like Red Rock. And you just in general are a little tankier. You're not much tankier than Gecko, but you're a little tankier than Gecko. On top of which, the bodies you put out are not always 5Ks like Gecko. Sometimes you're putting out the Edward Weevils and the Morias, making your attacks very efficient. And you also have the Jinbei to power out a very quick board, which Yamato has trouble with. And then finally, you have the threat of misputting, which makes them have to play a certain way, right? They can't take a few hits and kind of see what's going on with their hand. Misputting will punish them for that. So yeah, it's a pretty basic matchup, I think, at least going first. Going second, you're obviously going to be looking for your Jinbei. Your Perona here is not as important because you're going to be kind of playing the value plan. So you'll want Jinbei, you'll want Edward Weevil. Here you definitely want 2Ks so you can counter that first attack. Because they're almost certainly going to attach 3 Dawn and swing for 8. And at that point, you just give them 2Ks early and they're just going to have trouble getting into the game. Because the next turn, they're probably going to have to at least swing 7 to make sure they connect. And if they, just swing 5 after you developed a board, they're just going to lose. Another card that's fairly key going second is the Boa, just for the body, right? You're just playing a 6 for an 8K on your 6 Dawn turn, and they're going to have trouble dealing with it. When you go second, you just don't worry as much about the normal game plan of developing this huge board and value trades with like the 4-drop Gecko and Jinbei and Weevil. You're playing the beatdown essentially when you go second. So like Jinbei into Boa is probably Jinbei Weevil Boa is going to be your best curve. And then on your 8 Dawn turn, I wouldn't even concern myself with building a board anymore. If you still have your threats, I would just start swinging very efficiently, just kind of like a turn and burn. So you're going to protect your board heavily going second, just develop your threats, and then when you've reached a critical mass, there's probably only three characters at this point. You can swing something like 7, 9, 9, 9, just really go aggressive in that matchup. Because even if they survive, they're not going to be able to clear your board, and if you've drawn any number of realistic number of 2Ks, you're not going to be dying. So moving on to Black Yellow Luffy, I think this is a pretty interesting matchup, simply because you don't play this one kind of like you play the others. This is one where I would always take the draw. The reason being is Luffy always kills itself, right? Like to even be a deck, Luffy has to take its own life. Luffy has to get to 0. So going second in this matchup, you're going to be looking for the Jinbei curve. You're going to be looking for your Boa Hancocks. But also an important card in this matchup is going to be your Gravity Blade Raging Tiger. Even though it's pseudo off curve because you're going second, the fact that you get to just put their aces and their Sabos and Luffy's on bottom is just incredibly detrimental. I would generally, in this matchup, I counter out early if I can. So anything that's 5 or 6, just those 1-card pitches, counter out. If they're attacking for 8 or 9, they'll generally take those lives, even 7 from the rush ace. Basically because you want to counter the easy attacks so you can just take the big attacks later. Being a 5-life leader and having so many ways to effectively remove their board just makes you very powerful against them. You always want at least 1 Boa or 1 Mihawk for that kind of finishing blow, as it were. Even if they try to play their Gecko and get back to Sabos and become a 9K using the 2 Sabos, you could still, Raging Gravity Blade and attack for 12 with a Mihawk. So although it's probably not lethal, they will be out of resources at that point, right? Like the Black Yellow Luffy is a deck that exhausts a lot of resources to do its combo, and being able to so easily deal with the combo and strike their hand with something like a Mihawk just makes this matchup pretty good in my opinion. There's always also the threat of Charlotte Pudding. Like it's just such an incredible card against them, since they're playing this game plan of, taking my own life, building my hand, you're just putting them, and you can just put them out of the game, right? Like they can't effectively play the game plan they want to play because you have counters to everything. If you're going first, pretty basic. The only thing is that change is I'm not looking for the Perona. I don't really think you need to attack. I'd probably be looking for the Dofy blocker to kind of set up my draws, because you still want to play Jinbei into Weevil, but not necessarily to attack them, just to kind of develop your board. The Gravity Blade is still one of your best cards. Look for it on curve, even if they've already developed like an early ace, Sabo, or Luffy. And yeah, that's about it. It's a pretty straightforward matchup. To recap, going first, ideally, you want to curve perfectly, which is not something Dofy generally does, but it's a blocker into Jinbei Weevil, into Gravity Blade, and into Mihawk is going to be your best curve. Going second, a little more flexible. just kind of play bodies into Boa, into Gravity Blade, into Mihawk. And ultimately, it's not a race. You're just trying to develop a board state where they can't kill you and where you can either chip away at them over the course of a few turns or just blast them in one turn and get a lot of cards out of their hand. Because you're just a deck that easily eliminates their threats because you don't care about like Sabo's ability, right? And yeah, that's why. I think Tax Luffy's pretty free. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. We'll come find out. The only downside is Gecko, right? Like Gecko is the only thing that can really come after you. Enel. So I think Enel is pretty interesting. They have on paper, I feel like Enel has all the tools to beat you because they have so much big stuff. They have so many, they have a lot of threatening big things and they gain a lot of life. And you typically don't make huge boards that can't be dealt with because plays like Gadatsu, they play like Yamatos. But you do have a lot of tools helping this matchup. I typically like to go first. I do like the Proto opener. I like to get aggressive to get my board down, and I'll protect my board. Just to kind of show you what I mean. So I'll play Perona, and I'll attack, put something like the vanilla Gecko Moria Edward Weevil into play. And then next turn, I'll leader ability again, attack for 7, and I'll use my hand to protect my board. And depending on what they do, if we get to this kind of point where I'm having trouble getting them low on life or low on cards, then I'm going to stalemate and I'm going to stop attacking so they can't get cards out of my hand. And I'm going to continue working on developing my board through just playing my raw cards. It's things like my Bow and my Mihawk. It's not really a race game because they do have a lot of ways to gain life. They have the Katakuri or the Ace, or they have the Yamato. Pudding is very good in this matchup because with the addition of the new event that, this one, the event that 6 puts you on 1 life and kills anything, they tend to like to take early hits, so Pudding is also very strong in this matchup. Overall, I feel it's pretty good. In practice, on paper, I think it's bad. I think most people are approaching on paper and be like, oh, I'm dead. But in practice, I actually think it's a fairly good matchup. You should win pretty easily. Going second, not much changes. I think the Perona opener is still fine. Takes a backseat to Jinbei Weevil, but that's just basics at this point. And you will be looking for probably at least 1 Red Rock, just in case they get a quick Yamato, quick Ace down. You have trouble dealing with it, like they're high on cards, you can't attack it. So you want at least 1 Red Rock, and you can develop your board after with like a Gecko Moria or a Jinbei. Alright, what we got? Finally, our last good matchup, I think, is Reiju. I'm not sure if this deck really falls off. I know it's kind of a fan favorite, so I expect people to be playing it. But Reiju, I feel like, is kind of in the same vein as Red Purple Law, except a lot worse because they're not actually killing your board, or they're not killing it often. Reiju's biggest thing is they can, sneak out a 7k rusher on turn 2. Your best cards here, you're going to be going first if you win the dice roll. Your best cards are going to be your Perona opener and your Gravity Blade Raging Tiger. That card is just incredibly efficient against getting rid of their big Reijus, their big 5/6, it was a 5 for 6. Like, just being able to clear up their board and put it on bottom is just effectively very powerful. The 7-drop rusher can be a problem. It is dealt with by Mihawk, but for the most part, you're probably going to eat 2 or 3 hits to the face from it. But they're not a deck that just produces a lot of attacks out of nowhere or a lot of damage out of nowhere. So you can play big-handed, or at least play medium-handed because they do run Pudding. Just be cognizant of counting out the small attacks and taking the 7s, just so you can kind of play this late game where you don't have to worry about dying in 1 hit, but you're still not losing 3 to 4 cards off Miss Pudding. Last but not least, let's go into what I consider the most important matchup you're probably going to have to learn OP07 as Red Purple Law. Now, while this deck is incredibly strong and probably above Dofi as far as power is concerned, I think Doflamingo has a pretty good matchup into it. Whether you go first or second, personally, I'm going to pick second in this matchup. It's one where you're trying to be more attrition based rather than just trying to kill them with tempo. So they're going to be killing off your board pretty regularly, and you're going to be doing the same to them. So since we're going second, we're going to be looking for the Jinbei Weevil combo. This is incredibly strong, not only because you get 2 bodies, but because you get to replace one of the bodies, making sure that you're still up in this war of attrition. All your 2-for-1s are going to be strong in this matchup. Your Gravity Blade is really strong even if you're going second. Your Mihawk is strong even if you're going second. And all you're looking to do is get rid of their board efficiently while building your board, or making them, use their Gordons, their max raises, their, revolution fires to get rid of your things. Even though they are doing that while building their own tempo, they are a 4-life leader versus you being a 5-life leader, and you have a lot of ways to generate card advantage, not only tempo. This is not, on the surface, I feel like this looks like the old red-green law matchups, but it's not near as bad. They don't have things like the law blocker to protect their board. Your 7K swings are just good against almost anything they do. And the finisher they have in the Kid Killers, while scary, is nowhere near the, double attack Rush Luffy, 9 unblockable, 9 unblockable. Other things are, besides your 2-for-1s, Boa Hancock is fairly strong. This matchup going second just because of the size of the body. You can keep something from attacking you, getting a card out of your hand, and it's just hard for them to kill. Even the minus 4K doesn't allow them to leader ability it. So all in all, I think it's a pretty decent matchup. Going first, I'd be looking for the Prono Opener. I don't like attacking them, but if I have the Prono Opener, I'm going to anyway to build my board. And then, most importantly, after that, if you're going first, then you want your Curve, you want your Gravity Blade into your Mihawk. All in all, I think it's pretty Dofy favored if played correctly. I don't think it's anything like a 7-3, but probably a 6-4 to a 5-5, 4-5, depending on the skill of the pilots. All right, let's get into our neutral matchups. All right, now I'm going to go over the 2 neutral matchups, which I believe are going to be Bonney and Uta, like Film Uta. Starting with Film Uta, I don't really think like either deck has an edge unless you don't have Gum Gum Red Rock. I think without it, the matchup becomes pretty unwinnable if they draw a Kid. I do like to go first still to kind of remove. I'm not really like super afraid of them playing the Kid on 9 and attaching a Dawn, and then playing something like the 2-drop Dofy blocker that prevents KO, because that line in general doesn't really affect you. Because Red Rock kills it regardless, Red Rock removes it regardless. But I like to go first, looking for Prono, of course, and then Gravity Blade, super important, and then of course Mihawk. I think you can skip the 3-drop Dofy blocker. I don't think it's really important to set up your draw. I think it's more important to add an opener with Raging Blade and Mihawk. I think that's just the cards you're looking for, mainly because you can Gravity Blade their early threats, things like their Namis, things like their Brooks, just cards that are going to hit you and get additional cards out of your hand, because it's a difficult deck to fight with card advantage. And then Mihawk, of course, not only is it a big body that they can't deal with, it also gets rid of the blocker Luffy and sets you up being able to attack the Kid if necessary if you don't draw the Red Rock. Some of the things that are also very key in this matchup is the missed puddings. It's Uta. Uta plays big-handed. They take a lot of early hits. They like to draw a lot of cards. And Miss Pudding can just usually get 3 to 4 cards if they're not careful and playing around it. Other than that, it's a pretty straightforward matchup. There's not much to it. You want to clear board when possible. And then, realistically, I think if you don't draw Miss Pudding, instead of going for like a critical mass of attacks on 9 Dawn, you do want to get out a bigger body like the Mihawk, or put out 2 additional bodies like, Gecko Moria or Edward Weevil. As far as the things to watch out for besides Kid, you really don't want them to kill you with I'm invincible. This is pretty telegraphed. This is pretty common. Just 3 9K swings, right? This is something that came about in OP01 with the green kid. You always knew he's either going to swing 12-12, or if you had some characters in play, it was like 9-9-9. So this isn't something new if you've been playing for a while, but that's just something to keep in mind, that they can do 3 9K swings. In general, though, you have so much counter, so many 2Ks. It's just not something that really kills you out of nowhere, unless you've just fallen so far behind that you're not going to win the game anyway. Moving on to Bonney. Bonney's a really interesting deck. There are a couple of cards of theirs that's, a little difficult to play around, but not the end of the world. One being the leader ability in general. If they leave open a Dawn, it's kind of difficult to make the attacks you want to make, given how your leader effect works, since you need to attack your leader to trigger the ability. If they leave open a Dawn, you're almost always having to attack their leader first, which is not, in general, what you want to do. They have some interesting cards like Basil Hawkins, which is one of your key things to remove. Gravity Blade is really good at removing this, as long as you remember to attack all your characters first to disable his ability. And also the Cavendish is the other card that's just a really good Gravity Blade target. Other than that, it's, you're looking for your basic things. I love to go first against Bonney. I think it is a neutral matchup, but tilts in your favor if you win the dice roll, because I think going first is so strong against them. If you have the Prona Jinbei opener, I don't think they can win. I'm going to be honest. I think if you have Prona into Jinbei Weevil, I know it's the nut draw, but even like Prona into Jinbei, vanilla Gecko Moria, or even just, another 5K, it's really hard for them to stabilize if you go to first. There's not too much to really watch out for, other than be mindful of your order of operations when facing their leader ability, and be mindful of things like Basil Hawkins if you're trying to remove it, because his ability works against things that just, remove it from play. It's not KO. It's if this would be removed from play, instead you can rest from your opponent's characters, and the way you play around that is tapping all your characters while attacking your opponent. Alright, now we're going to talk about the what I consider the dice roll matchups. I think these really come down to the dice roll. I don't think they're super unfavored one way or the other, but definitely the black decks, Gecko and Lucci, I'm going to consider the dice roll matchups. I think going first is incredibly important. Starting with Gecko, if you, with the banning of Great Eruption, just being able to come out the gates early with the Jinbei, or even just like an Edward Weevil start, generally sets you up with so much tempo. Gecko has a lot of trouble recovering. The main thing to worry about is them rushing to a 8-drop Gecko Moria and using their, Helmeppo Lucci to remove your board and removing what I consider critical mass. So in this matchup, it's very important to preserve your board as much as possible. The easiest ways to do that is just, even on 5K attacks, you can pitch your 2Ks, or on your 7 Dawn turn, if you still have 2 characters in play, if not more, the Gravity Blade is pretty good in this spot. Just removing their 2 characters that can attack your board back, and then swinging 5K, 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 or 5K, 6K, 6K is generally pretty strong. A good follow-up to the Gecko Moria turn, because assuming they kill one of your things, have their Gecko Moria, it is actually a Mihawk, unless they're on, 1 life, and then you could just go ahead and swing for 9, then 10 if you're trying to kill them. Just the main thing to remember is preserving your board. Just protect your board. Don't let them have free attacks at your board. Don't, if you have, they attack something for 5, that's a 5K, and you have a 2K, just pitch it. Because in general, they're the ones that are going to be on the back foot, and you're going to have a high life total. towards the end, that mid game to end game, if you've won the dice roll. If you didn't win the dice roll and you're going second, Jinbei becomes fairly important because you need it to be able to establish the tempo you need to do what you could do if you went first by going second. If Jinbei into a Weevil, excellent start. I guess one of the big questions is, should you attack their board? And in general, yes, because you don't want them to have to decide. You want to make the decision for them, right? You don't want to get your opponent to decide, do I want a card or do I want to keep my, do I want another card in my hand, give them something they need. So going second, yes, you definitely want to attack their board. They attack their Perona, just put it back in the trash. Attack for 5 with Jinbei, attack it for 6 with Edward Weevil. And then if they keep it around, which is not uncommon because they, same as you, need to establish critical mass, this is where Boa comes in and is incredibly effective, because not only does it keep them from making 3 attacks back on your board because you've nerfed one of their characters that made them so can't attack, you've also established an 8k body. So your perfect curve is kind of important going second. As far as things like missed pudding is concerned, it really depends on the Gecko player. Like I said, I have some that protect their board religiously, and I have some that are going to let their board go. So if you're able to establish Jinbei into Boa Hancock, you might consider making a big turn swing for, 9 with something like your Jinbei, and then 8 with Boa, you want to do 8 with Boa, 9 with Jinbei, and then play a missed pudding if you can get 3+ cards out of their hand. So that's really just depends on what the game state's looking like. It does get hard if they have something, like an Ice Age into an Absalon, or, I'm not sure how much Gecko is going to be around with Rob Lucci, but it's going to be close to the same thing. So just watch out for protecting your board as much as possible and being able to develop critical mass and go after the life at an opportune time. In general, the general rule for me is if I can make 2 efficient attacks over what would they be at 0 life, this is when I consider myself having critical mass. And what I mean is if they have 2 life and I can swing at least 7 4 times, I consider this critical mass, because I know I'm going to get at least 4 cards out of their hand, right? Like you swing 7, they take it, you swing 7, they take it. The next 2 7s, you're going to eat at least 4 cards. So that's generally when I consider critical mass in a matchup like Gecko Moria, and that's what you should probably be looking towards if you're going to be closing out the game over the course of 2 turns or even 1 turn if they're incredibly unlucky. Now what's probably going to be the one you're going to face more, and the more difficult black deck's definitely Rob Lucci. I think a lot of this not only comes down to dice roll, but whether or not they draw, I believe it's called Ennis Lobby, their stage. Without the stage, I feel this matchup's pretty much, I'm not going to say free, but it's so much easier if they don't have it, because they can't power out the Luccis and the Ikakus and, just kind of Ikaku. I think it's Kaku, not Ikaku. Watch too much Bleach. They can't power out the Luccis and the Kaku the same way without the stage. They have a harder time removing multiple threats without the stage. But with it, since your board is mostly 4 or less, it's just going to be an uphill battle. If you go second and they draw stage, it's just an uphill battle. Because then things like Brook kill your board, things like Lucci will take out 2 things, and it's going to be really hard for you to establish that much tempo against a 5-life leader. Again, the best things you can do is Jinbei into a Weevil, so you're maintaining not only cards, you're putting out pressure on the board. Boa Hancock, a little harder to remove. And in the late game, Mihawk is good. He's a 9-drop. He swings efficiently by himself. Now, the real question that you're probably going to face a lot is when you're on 10 Dawn and they just drop their Gecko Moria, do you Red Rock and go for a hero power attack, or are you going to play a Mihawk and get rid of something like the Kaku or Rob Lucci? And in general, I'm going to say you probably want to play the Mihawk and establish your own board, just because it's kind of like you're making a 2-for-1. You're getting a body and removing a body. The only way I would go against this is if you know the top of your deck and it's something solid like an Edward Weevil, and your leader swing is removing a threat, something like that's rested and they attacked with. Otherwise, as a general rule, I'm going to play the Mihawk because I know it's harder for them to deal with, and I'm just going to resign myself to eating those 9k swings from the Gecko Moria. Alright, now we're going to go over some of the, well, let's go over the first true bad matchup. And even though, I don't really think it's that bad. People say so. I think Blue Nami is not a great matchup, but, honestly, the way your deck works, it's not really bad for you. You do have things like Gravity Blade, which is kind of underrated in a matchup like Nami, because if you use it effectively, you are putting 2 cards back in their deck. And if you ever played against a Blue Nami, that can effectively equal 2 additional turns. You have some big characters like Boa Hancock and Basil to close out games, both of which actually put cards on the bottom of her library as well. The only problem is if your draw isn't, if you go first and you don't have the Perna opener and you miss on your leader ability, then you're probably just so far behind you're not going to win. Additionally, you have things like Miss Pudding, which again, sometimes Nami plays big-handed, especially if you go for aggressive attacks early. I would think that a line of play would be attack for 7, let's say put in 7 Warlords, and if they take it, you might just attack for 10 next turn to set up a Miss Pudding for 3 cards. And this is so good because, again, it's putting cards into Nami's deck, which I think is a reasonable win condition, given that Nami has to go through the entire deck. You put 5 or 6 cards over the course of the game back to the deck, you can just win. You can just win off the back of that. Other than that, you just want to flood the board. I'm not really a big attack every turn type of player against Nami. I do like to build a board first and then attack them. But the addition of, I think it's called White Snake, it makes it a little more difficult because they can become a 6k leader or even a 7k leader if they have 2 of them. So that's just something to keep in mind. If you're playing to attack in a turn, make sure that you're swinging 6s or 7s or even 8s and 9s. Probably not 8, but 9s instead of just swinging 5s into a White Snake. Just be aware of that. That's something they can do. Other than that, maybe it's not so bad. You're just playing your normal game. You want to get your engine online. You want to drop something like a Boa early. Again, I do like to go first, just on the off chance you have the nut opener, a Jinbei, into a 6k. They just fall so far behind because on that 4 dawn turn, now you're swinging. You can swing 7/7, 6 and still get your leader ability off, which is kind of crazy. That's Nami in a nutshell. Not too much to it. I think the only thing that really people struggle with in Nami is when to attack and how much to attack with. And again, the main thing for me is just you have to decide whether you're going to build your board out further or you think you have a critical mass to attack them, and that's just really dependent on how many cards in their hand, what cards they've seen, and that's really just an experience thing to me. But do not underestimate the power of, hey, I got my Nami on 1 life early, I'm just going to swing 15 every turn with my leader. That's actually a very decent strategy, or even 18 if you have a Boa Hancock. If you don't think they can kill you quickly, that's something that, because they essentially have to take it, and they can't, it's hard for them to use their White Snakes to defend a big attack like that. So that leaves them open to the follow-up 5k swings from the rest of your board if that's how you decide to attack. In closing, just the important things to remember the Dofi deck are going to be when you reach critical mass, make sure you're making efficient attacks. There's no reason to build out your board anymore. There's no reason to do anything other than make good solid attacks to your characters, because if you're just swinging for 5s and 6s and building out your board, you're either already winning so much, you're just going to win more and give your opponent more time, or you're making a mistake, in my opinion. And the second thing is just every time you make your stack, make sure you rearrange it, look at it carefully, think, okay, I'm going to draw this. this is going to come and play off my leader ability. I'm going to draw this. And if you think that something's going to change, your play might change. Say on 7 Dawn, you think you're in a Gravity Blade. Just keep that mental note that while I'm drawing this, this comes on my leader ability. I'm drawing this, and then are my next 2 cards hits, or is only my next card hit because I thought I was going to put it into play, but I decided to do something else like Gravity Blade. And you do that, and you're going to be fine. Again, this is William Craddock, brought to you by Kayfabe Cards. Great store. Our sponsor is one of the biggest reasons we're able to keep up with this and make all these videos. Make sure if you like this video, check out our Patreon. We're kind of reformatting. We're trying to make these videos that don't run for forever, but they have enough information to help you get out there and take Doflamingo to a tournament and get some wins. So yeah, appreciate y'all for watching, and check y'all next time.